The grocery bill for an average American family has jumped by over 40% since 2019. Everyone blames inflation, but inflation has cooled off. Prices haven't come down. And the reason has almost nothing to do with supply chains, gas prices, or the economy. It has everything to do with a strategy most people have never heard of. In this video, we're going to break down the real mechanics behind why your food costs so much, who's actually pocketing the difference, and why prices are almost certainly never going back to where they were, no matter what the Fed does. For most of the 20th century, grocery prices moved slowly. They'd tick up a few percent a year, roughly matching wages. The system wasn't perfect, but it was predictable. You could walk into a supermarket in 1995 and again in 2005, and the price of eggs, bread, and ground beef hadn't changed enough to shock you. The grocery business operated on a simple model: thin margins, high volume. Supermarkets made about 1 to 3 cents of profit on every dollar you spent. They competed aggressively on price because that was the only way to get you through the door. If one store raised prices too much, you'd drive 5 minutes to the next one. Then 2020 happened. Lockdowns broke supply chains. Shipping containers that used to cost $2,000 suddenly cost $15,000. Labor shortages hit warehouses, farms, and trucking routes simultaneously. And for the first time in a generation, grocery companies had a legitimate reason to raise prices across the board. Consumers understood. Nobody blamed the store when the whole world was falling apart. But here's the thing, the supply chain crisis ended. Shipping costs came back down, and yet your grocery bill stayed exactly where it was, or went higher. That gap between the crisis ending and prices staying elevated, that's not inflation, that's something else entirely. Insight 1. The mechanism, how greedflation actually works. There's a term economists started using around 2022, greedflation. It sounds like a slogan, but the mechanics behind it are straightforward. When input costs rise, fuel, labor, raw materials, companies raise their prices. That's normal. But what happened in the grocery industry is that companies raised prices beyond what their increased costs justified. They used inflation as cover to widen their profit margins, and the numbers back this up. A 2023 report from the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City found that corporate profit growth accounted for more than half of the increase in consumer prices during the post-pandemic period. Not wages, not supply costs, profit. Think of it like this. Imagine your landlord's property taxes go up by $50 a month. That's a real cost increase, so they raise your rent by $50. That's fair. Now imagine they raise your rent by $200 and tell you it's because of property taxes. That extra $150, that's not a cost pass-through. That's a margin grab. And that is essentially what happened with your groceries. In 2023, the 5 largest food companies in the world posted combined profits of over $50 billion. Not revenue, profit. While families were cutting coupons and switching to store brands. But inflated margins only work if everyone raises prices together. And that raises an uncomfortable question. How did they all land on the same strategy at the same time? Insight 2. The players. Why competition isn't saving you. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. The reason prices moved in lockstep is because the grocery industry isn't really competitive anymore, not in the way most people imagine. In 1990, the top 5 grocery retailers controlled about 20% of the US market. Today, that number is closer to 55%. Walmart alone captures roughly a quarter of every grocery dollar spent in America. When you add Kroger, Costco, Albertsons, and Ahold Delhaize, more than half the market is locked up. And it's not just at the retail level. Go upstream, and the concentration is even more extreme. 4 companies process over 80% of all beef in the United States. 2 companies control the majority of the global seed market. The entire supply chain, from farm to shelf, passes through a shrinking number of hands. When an industry consolidates this much, you don't need a conspiracy to get coordinated pricing. You just need a few earnings calls. When the CEO of one major food company tells shareholders that consumers are absorbing higher prices with minimal pushback, every competitor hears the same signal: there's room to push further. If you've noticed that switching brands doesn't save you much anymore, this is why. When the same parent company owns the premium brand and the budget brand, switching just moves money from one of their pockets to the other. And that brings us to the part nobody wants to hear. Because even if regulators wanted to fix this, the system has a built-in defense mechanism. Insight 3. The trap. Why this can't easily be undone. You might think, just break up the monopolies, pass some laws, cap prices. But price controls have been tried in dozens of countries, and the result is almost always the same: shortages. When you tell companies they can't charge above a certain price, they stop producing the products that aren't profitable at that price. Shelves go empty. Black markets appear. It gets worse, not better. What about antitrust enforcement? In theory, yes. In practice, grocery mergers keep getting approved. When Kroger and Albertsons announced a $25 billion merger that would have combined the first and second largest traditional supermarket chains in the country, regulators pushed back. But the fact that a deal like that was even proposed tells you where the incentive structure points. The industry wants to consolidate further, not less. And here's the trap that completes the loop. Food companies have discovered that consumers adjust. You complain for a few months, then the new price becomes your baseline. Psychologists call this anchoring. Once you've paid $6 for a dozen eggs for 6 months, $5.50 feels like a deal, even though it was £2.80 3 years ago. The outrage fades, the margin stays. It's like boiling a frog. No single price increase is dramatic enough to make you stop buying groceries. You can't just opt out of eating. And they know that. So what does this mean for you right now? It means the 40% increase you've been absorbing is not temporary. It's structural. The companies that raised prices have no financial incentive to lower them. Their shareholders would revolt. Their stock prices would drop. In a system where profit must grow every quarter, a price cut is a failure, even if the cost justification for the high price disappeared 2 years ago. It also means the usual advice doesn't fully work anymore. Shop smarter, use coupons, buy in bulk. These help at the margins, but they don't address the underlying dynamic. You're optimizing within a system that's been tilted against you. Now, some people will say this is just how markets work. Companies charge what the market will bear. That's capitalism. And technically, that's true. But when 4 companies control 80% of the beef supply and you need to eat to survive, what the market will bear stops being a free market question. It becomes a power question. If you want to understand how this kind of corporate consolidation plays out in other industries and why the same pattern keeps repeating, I break that down in my video on how monopolies hide in plain sight. Link in the description. You didn't get a 40% raise, but somehow you're expected to pay 40% more for the same cart of groceries. That's not inflation, that's extraction. The price tag on your groceries isn't a reflection of what food costs to produce. It's a reflection of how much you'll pay before you stop buying. And right now, the answer is almost anything, because you don't have a choice. If this changed how you see your grocery bill, subscribe.